Before we begin, here is what this episode covers. 427-1. That was the House vote on House Resolution 4405, the Epstein Records Transparency Act. The Senate passed it unanimously. The President signed it. It became Public Law 119-38. The law mandated release within 30 days of all unclassified DOJ records related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It prohibited withholding based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. The DOJ released approximately 3.5 million pages, roughly 58% of the 6 million plus pages it identified as responsive. It declared this release final. 43 victims had their full names and home addresses exposed. Perpetrator names were heavily redacted. The statutory intent was inverted. The people the law was designed to protect were exposed. The people it was designed to expose were protected. Then came the depositions. Wexner. Clinton. The first former president compelled to testify under subpoena. And this project sent 29 congressional letters, each vetted against the corpus, each with an analytical enclosure. 427-1. A near-unanimous law, a 58% release. What happened? (427-1). That was the House vote on House Resolution 4405, the Epstein Records Transparency Act. 427 members of Congress voted to release these documents. 1 voted against. Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana, who argued the bill needed stronger privacy protections for witnesses and family members. 1 dissent out of 428 votes cast. The Senate didn't even need a roll call. Unanimous consent. No debate, no objection. 427-1. In a Congress that agrees on almost nothing, a Congress that fights over the naming of post offices, they agreed on this. House Resolution 4405, introduced July 15, 2025, by Thomas Massie, Republican, Kentucky, and Ro Khanna, Democrat, California. 24 co-sponsors, 23 Democrats, 1 Republican, but the bill bypassed committee entirely. On November 12, 218 members signed a discharge petition, the exact minimum required to force a floor vote. 214 Democrats and 4 Republicans, Massie, Green, Mace, and Boebert. That matters. A discharge petition overrides the committee chair. It says, "We are not waiting for permission." 6 days later, the House voted 427-1. The next day, the Senate passed it by unanimous consent, and the President signed it. From introduction to law, 4 months. From discharge petition to presidential signature, 7 days. 7 days from petition to law. That almost never happens. Section 2A is the mandate. Within 30 days, the Attorney General must release in searchable, downloadable format all unclassified records relating to Epstein and Maxwell. Not some records, not a representative sample, all unclassified records. The scope is comprehensive. Investigations, prosecutions, flight logs, travel records, corporate entities, immunity deals, internal DOJ communications about why charges were or were not filed. And then there is Provision 8, the provision most relevant to our work, spoliation evidence. Records about the destruction, concealment, or alteration of documents. Congress did not just say, release what you have. Congress said, release records showing whether what you have is complete. The law explicitly mandates release of records showing whether evidence was tampered with. Section 2B. Records cannot be withheld based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. Read that again. Embarrassment is not a valid reason to withhold. Reputational harm is not a valid reason to withhold. Political sensitivity is not a valid reason to withhold. That prohibition is the heart of the statute. It means the names of powerful people are not a valid reason to redact. The law is not absolute. It permits 5 narrow categories of withholding. Victim Personally Identifiable Information, CSAM, Child Sexual Abuse Material, information that would jeopardize active investigations, but only temporarily, graphic images depicting abuse or death, and properly classified national security material. 5 exceptions, all narrow, all specified. And here is the accountability mechanism. Every single redaction requires written justification published in the Federal Register and submitted to Congress, not a blanket justification, a redaction by redaction accounting. There is also an anti-retroactive classification provision. If information was classified after July 1st, 2025, after the bill was introduced, the government must separately publish the classification date, the authority who ordered it, and an unclassified summary of what was classified. Think about what that means. Congress anticipated that someone might try to classify documents after the bill passed to avoid releasing them, so they wrote a provision specifically to prevent that. The law was carefully drafted. The exceptions are narrow. The accountability mechanisms are specific. Remember that, because what comes next is the implementation. Source check. Everything in this episode about the statute comes from one place, Public Law 119-38. The full text is available at congress.gov. Section 2 is the release mandate. The language is direct. The Attorney General shall make publicly available in searchable and downloadable format all records in the possession of the Department of Justice relating to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Shall. Not may, not should consider, shall. The vote record is public. The bill history is public. The co-sponsors, the discharge petition, the committee referral, all public. We are reading the law. You can too. November 19th, 2025. The President signed House Resolution 4405 into law. Public Law 119-38. From introduction to signature, 4 months and 4 days. From discharge petition to law, 7 days. And now the clock started. Section 2A required the Attorney General to release all unclassified records within 30 days. 30 days. Not 90, not a reasonable time. 30 days. December 19th, 2025. That was the statutory deadline. The question was no longer whether the law existed. 427 members of Congress and the President had settled that. The question was whether the Department of Justice would follow it. January 30th, 2026. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche held a press conference. He announced the DOJ's fifth and final release of Epstein-related documents. 3.5 million pages. That sounds like a lot, and it is. 3.5 million pages is an enormous volume of material. But in the same press conference, Blanche said something else. He said the DOJ had identified more than 6 million pages as potentially responsive to the statute. 3.5 million out of 6 million plus. That is approximately 58%. 58%. The statute says all unclassified records. Not most, not the majority, not a representative sample. All. 58% is not all. The DOJ attributes the gap to duplicates, child sexual abuse material, privilege claims, and non-responsive material. But the DOJ has not published a deduplication methodology. It has not permitted an independent audit of the unreleased 42%. It has not provided a breakdown. How many pages are duplicates? How many are CSAM? How many are privilege? In the released corpus, our analysis finds a content-level duplication rate under 4%. If that rate holds across the full 6 million pages, duplicates would account for roughly 240,000 pages, not 2.5 million. Something else is in that 42%. We do not know what. February 6, 2026. The Democracy Defenders Fund filed a complaint with the DOJ's Office of Inspector General, the OIG. The allegations were specific: over-redacting records beyond what the statute permitted, withholding records that fall within the release mandate, narrowing the scope of the search, meaning the DOJ may not have looked in all the places the law required it to look. This was not the first challenge. A month earlier, on January 6th, a bipartisan group of senators led by Dick Durbin had requested an OIG audit of DOJ compliance with the law. Two branches of government, congressional oversight and an independent civil organization, both concluded independently that the DOJ had not complied with the statute it was legally required to follow. The law passed 427 to 1, and within 3 months of its signing, 2 separate entities were filing formal complaints about non-compliance. The law's intent was clear. Section 2C, protect victim personally identifiable information. Section 2B, do not withhold based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. Protect victims. Expose perpetrators. What happened was the opposite. The Wall Street Journal found at least 43 victims' full names exposed in the January 30th release. 43. 24 or more were minors when they were abused. Some names appeared over 100 times, with home addresses attached. Searchable, downloadable, findable by anyone with an internet connection and a keyword. Meanwhile, the names of the men those victims accused, the perpetrators, were heavily redacted. Black bars across every identifying detail. Think about what that means. A victim's home address, published on a government website. The name of the person she accused, redacted. On February 1st, attorneys representing more than 200 survivors filed an emergency takedown motion in the Southern District of New York before Judges Berman and Engelmeyer. One attorney described it as the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in a single day in United States history. The statute was inverted. The people it was designed to protect were exposed. The people it was designed to expose were protected. Let me walk through the timeline. January 30th, the DOJ publishes 3.5 million pages, unredacted victim names, home addresses, nude and semi-nude images with faces visible. January 31st, attorneys report thousands of redaction failures affecting approximately 100 survivors. Thousands of failures, not dozens, thousands. February 1st, more than 200 attorneys file an emergency takedown motion in the Southern District of New York. February 2nd, the DOJ removes several thousand documents and media items. 5 days. For 5 days, victim names and images were publicly accessible on a government website, a website created to comply with a law designed to protect those victims. And even after the takedown, it was not fully remediated. On February 26th, nearly a month later, CNN reported that dozens of problematic images still remained on the site. The DOJ only fixed them after CNN notified the department. A news organization had to tell the Department of Justice that it was still exposing victims. The DOJ did not find the problem. It was told. February 24th, 2026. NPR reported that the DOJ had withheld or removed more than 50 pages of FBI interview records. The content: accusations against President Trump by a woman who alleged sexual abuse when she was approximately 13 years old in approximately 1983. The FBI conducted 4 interviews with this witness, producing 4 302 summaries. A 302 is the standard FBI form for documenting witness interviews. 4 interviews, 4 summaries. Dated July 24th, August 7th, August 20th, and October 16th, 2019. Only one was included in the release, the July 24th summary. The other 3 were missing. 3 out of 4 FBI interview summaries gone from the release. Files related to a key prosecution witness in the Maxwell trial were also removed. 2 days later, the DOJ said it was reviewing whether files had been improperly withheld. Representatives Comer and Garcia, one Republican, one Democrat, both demanded an explanation. Now remember Section 2B of the law. Records cannot be withheld based on political sensitivity affecting government officials or public figures. The withholding of politically sensitive material involving the sitting president is precisely what the statute was written to prohibit. We are not making a judgment about the underlying accusation. We are making a judgment about the withholding. The law says you cannot withhold based on political sensitivity, and the material withheld was politically sensitive. February 15th, 2026. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche sent a 6-page letter to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Section 3 of the law required something specific: an unredacted list of all government officials and politically exposed persons named in the materials. The term for that is PEP, politically exposed person. No redactions permitted on this list. What the letter contained was, technically, a list. It included Presidents Trump and Clinton, Steve Bannon, Kathy Rumler, Les Wexner. It also included Princess Diana, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson. No differentiation, no context, no explanation of why each name appeared. Someone who was accused of criminal conduct appeared on the same list as someone whose name was mentioned in a single document in passing. Someone who flew on the planes appeared on the same list as a cultural figure who may have been mentioned in a contact book. The list was technically compliant and functionally useless. Congressional members from both parties criticized the letter as deliberately unhelpful. A literal compliance with the letter of the requirement, designed to defeat the purpose of the requirement. Malicious compliance is still non-compliance when the intent of the law is clear. February 9th, 2026. Representatives Khanna and Massie, the bill's two sponsors, one Democrat, one Republican, went to the DOJ Annex in Washington to review unredacted files. Here's what the review station looks like. 4 computers, not 40, not 400, 4. Available 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. 24 hours notice required. No staff permitted. Members of Congress only. No aides, no researchers, no counsel. A member of Congress sits alone at a government computer reviewing millions of pages of evidence with no support staff. And the DOJ tracks everything. Every document opened, every search term entered, every minute logged. At a hearing on February 11th, Attorney General Bondi was photographed holding a printout labeled Jayapal Pramila Search History. The search activity of a sitting member of Congress, a member of the opposing party, printed out and carried to a public hearing. Think about what that does. If you are a member of Congress and you know the Attorney General is printing your search history and bringing it to hearings, do you search for the names you actually want to investigate, or do you search more carefully? Speaker Johnson, a Republican, called the surveillance not appropriate. At this pace, 4 computers, 9 hours a day, members only, it would take more than 7 years for Congress to review the full unredacted corpus. In January, CNN polled Americans. Only 6% were satisfied with the government's handling of the Epstein file releases. 6%. After reviewing the unredacted files, Khanna and Massie made a public statement. 6 men. Their names appear in the unredacted corpus. Their conduct, as described in the documents, suggests they are likely incriminated. Likely incriminated. That is the language used by the 2 members of Congress who wrote the law, who reviewed the unredacted files, who saw what the public cannot see. Their names remain redacted in the public release. We do not know who they are. We do not know which documents describe their conduct. We do not know whether the DOJ has referred any of them for prosecution. What we do know is what the law says. Section 2B. Records cannot be withheld based on reputational harm or political sensitivity. 6 men, likely incriminated by the evidence, names still hidden behind black bars. The sponsors of the law, the people who wrote it, who fought for the discharge petition, who shepherded it through 427 to 1, say the redactions violate the statute they authored. The people who wrote the law say the Department of Justice is breaking it. 6 redacted men. February 18th, 2026. Les Wexner sat for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee, approximately 5 hours. Wexner was the founder of L Brands, the company behind Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works. For decades, he was one of the wealthiest people in Ohio. He was also, for decades, Jeffrey Epstein's most significant financial patron. Wexner granted Epstein power of attorney. Wexner transferred a $77 million Manhattan townhouse to Epstein. Wexner's money built the foundation of Epstein's financial empire. In the deposition, Wexner said he was conned by Epstein, that he had completely and irrevocably cut ties approximately 20 years ago. He said Epstein would name drop, including Trump, as part of cultivating an image of influence. Representative Garcia responded directly. He said Wexner was the single person most responsible for providing Epstein financial support. Democrats on the committee accused Wexner of lying about the extent of his relationship. In our corpus, the released files, Wexner's name appears more than 1,000 times. Our database confirms that. 14,308 person-type mentions for Wexner and his name variants across the released documents. 1,000 is a conservative figure. He has never been charged. Never charged. February 26 and 27, 2026. Behind closed doors. Hillary Clinton, then Bill Clinton. Let me walk through the timeline that led here. The subpoenas were issued on August 5, 2025, by then-Chairman Comer of House Oversight. The Clintons defied them for 6 months. On January 21, 2026, the committee voted, bipartisan, to hold both in contempt, not along party lines, bipartisan. On February 3rd, they agreed to testify, averting a full House contempt vote. Hillary Clinton sat for approximately 6 hours on February 26. She said she never met Epstein, never flew on his plane, never visited his properties. She described knowing Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance. Maxwell attended Chelsea Clinton's 2010 wedding as a +1. She said she never met Epstein. The committee did not release the transcript. We do not know what evidence, if any, was presented to her during those 6 hours. Bill Clinton sat the following day, more than 6 hours, in New York City, behind closed doors. He said he first met Epstein in 2002. The flight logs, which this project extracted using a vision language model in script 16F, show 16 or more entries for Clinton on Epstein's aircraft in 2002 and 2003. 16 flights in 2 years. I saw nothing and I did nothing wrong. Bill Clinton became the first former president compelled to testify under subpoena in this matter. Subpoenaed in August, defiant for 6 months, faced with contempt, then testified. The depositions were behind closed doors. The content we have comes from post-deposition statements and reporting, not from transcripts. When transcripts are released, read them directly, not our summary, not anyone's summary, the primary source. Pipeline stage. This project does not just analyze documents, it acts on the analysis. Scripts 13 through 15 are the congressional letter generation pipeline. Script 13, Recipient Vetting, a 4-layer screening protocol that searches every proposed congressional recipient against the entire corpus using a GIN full-text search index. 2.1 million documents searched in seconds. If a recipient's name appears in Epstein-related documents, we flag it before sending them anything. Script 14, Letter Generation. 29 letters, one to each vetted recipient, in both Word and PDF format, automated, reproducible, documented. Script 15, the analytical summary enclosure, a condensed version of the pipeline's findings attached to each letter, not opinion, data. The output, 29 letters to congressional offices, each with a data-driven enclosure, each sent to a recipient vetted against the corpus. The pipeline went from ingesting documents to writing to Congress. This project sent 29 letters to members of Congress. That is not a metaphor. 29 letters were generated, vetted, and sent. Each letter included an analytical summary enclosure, a condensed version of the pipeline's findings from the 2.1 million documents in the corpus. Not a summary of news coverage, not a petition, a data-driven enclosure showing what the pipeline found. The recipients were selected from 3 categories: co-sponsors of House Resolution 4405, signatories of the discharge petition, and chairs of the relevant committees, Judiciary and Oversight. Before sending a single letter, every recipient was screened. A 4-layer vetting protocol searched each name against the full corpus. The question was simple: does this member of Congress appear in Epstein-related documents? If so, what is the context? Because if we are writing to Congress about Epstein accountability, we need to be certain we are not writing to someone who appears in the evidence as a participant. The letters were generated by Script 14, the enclosure by Script 15, the vetting by Script 13, configuration from a recipient's file. The sender, Angel Reyes, Doctor of Public Health candidate at Claremont Graduate University. Not anonymous, not hidden, named. 29 letters, each vetted, each documented, each traceable. The vetting protocol has 4 layers. Layer 1, GIN TS vector full text search. Does this person's name appear in any document in the corpus? A GIN index is a database structure optimized for text search. It checks 2.1 million documents in seconds. Layer 2, Entity Table Lookup. Was this person's name extracted as a named entity by our NER pipeline, our Named Entity Recognition System? Not just mentioned, recognized by the system as a person. Layer 3, Co-occurrence check. Does this name co-occur with known Epstein-linked entities in the same documents? Appearing in the same document as Epstein or Maxwell is different from appearing in an unrelated context. Layer 4, context review. If any previous layer flags a match, what is the context? A news article quoting them? A witness statement? An accusation? Context determines whether a match is disqualifying. Result: all 29 recipients cleared. None had substantive connections to Epstein in the corpus. That is the standard we set for ourselves. Every recipient screened against every document before we sent a single letter. 29 recipients in 3 tiers. Tier 1, the 5 members with the most direct authority over Epstein oversight. Jim Jordan, Republican, Ohio, Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley, Republican, Iowa, Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Ro Khanna, Democrat, California, the lead co-sponsor of House Resolution 4405. Thomas Massie, Republican, Kentucky, the primary sponsor, and Robert Garcia, Democrat, California, ranking member of the relevant House Oversight Subcommittee. 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The tiers are bipartisan, like the law itself. Tier 2, Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace, both Republicans, both discharge petition signatories who crossed party leadership to force the bill to a vote. Tier 3, the remaining 22 recipients, co-sponsors, committee members, and others with oversight roles. Every recipient was vetted. Every letter was identical in substance. The tiers determined delivery priority, not content. As of production, no responses have been received. 29 letters, 0 replies. The release files did not only affect domestic politics. February 23rd, Peter Mandelson, former UK Cabinet Minister, former European Union Trade Commissioner, arrested by the National Crime Agency, released on bail. February 28th, Borge Brende, President of the World Economic Forum, quit. Jack Lang, former French Culture Minister, placed under investigation by the Parquet de Paris. He resigned as president of the Arab World Institute. Mona Juul, Norway's ambassador to Jordan and Iraq, resigned. Richard Axel, Columbia University neuroscientist, Nobel laureate, stepped down as co-director of the Zuckerman Institute on February 24th. 5 countries, 5 resignations or arrests, all in February 2026, all following the release of Epstein-related documents under Public Law 119-38. The United Kingdom, France, Norway, Switzerland, the United States. The law's reach extends beyond the Department of Justice, beyond the borders of the country that passed it. 2 members of Congress filed articles of impeachment against Attorney General Bondi. Representative Thanedar, Democrat, Michigan, on February 2nd, alleging conspiracy to cover up Epstein files. Representative Ansari, Democrat, Arizona, on February 26, citing file handling failures. Neither is likely to advance in a Republican-controlled House, but they are on the record. Meanwhile, the DOJ's surveillance of Congress drew bipartisan condemnation. We covered this in the Congressional Access slide, but it bears repeating in this context. At the February 11th hearing, Attorney General Bondi was photographed holding a printout labeled Jayapal Pramila Search History, a record of what a sitting member of Congress searched for when reviewing Epstein files at the DOJ facility. On February 13th, Representatives Jayapal, Raskin, and Garcia demanded the DOJ cease tracking congressional searches. Speaker Johnson, a Republican, called the surveillance not appropriate. And here's the structural reality that underlies all of this. The Epstein Files Transparency Act contains no penalty for noncompliance. The law says, shall release. It does not say what happens if the Attorney General does not. 427 members of Congress passed a law with no enforcement mechanism. The question now is whether political pressure can substitute for legal consequence. Transparent science. The 58% figure is central to this episode, so let us be precise about where it comes from and what it does not tell us. The numerator, 3.5 million pages, comes from the DOJ's own press release on January 30th. The denominator, 6 million plus, comes from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche at the same press conference. His exact words: more than 6 million pages being identified as potentially responsive. The DOJ says the gap is explained by duplicates, CSAM, child sexual abuse material, legal privilege, and non-responsive material. Those are legitimate categories. Some material should be withheld. No one is arguing that CSAM should be released. No one is arguing that victim images should be published. But the DOJ has not published a deduplication methodology. It has not permitted an independent audit of the unreleased material. It has not provided a precise count of how many pages were withheld for each reason. In our corpus, the released material, content-level duplication is under 4%. If that rate held across the full 6 million, duplicates would account for roughly 240,000 pages, not 2.5 million. 58% is our best estimate. There is no official denominator. The DOJ said more than 6 million. That is not a precise number. It is a floor, not a ceiling. We use it because it is the most authoritative figure available, from the Deputy Attorney General himself. If the DOJ publishes a precise count, we will update this figure. Until then, 58% is what the math says. What we cannot know. The depositions were behind closed doors. We have public statements, reporting, and post-deposition comments, but not the transcripts. If transcripts are released, they should be read directly, not summarized. Not by us, not by anyone. Read the primary source. The 6 redacted men. Their identities are known only to the members of Congress who reviewed the unredacted files. We do not know who they are. We sent 29 congressional letters. As of production, no responses have been received. The full responsive universe, the denominator in the 58% calculation, is imprecise. More than 6 million is not a number. It is a floor with no ceiling. The composition of the withheld material, how much is CSAM, how much is privilege, how much is something else, has not been published. The DOJ has not broken it down. Whether the DOJ has referred any of the 6 redacted individuals for prosecution, unknown. And the DOJ's February 26th statement that it was reviewing whether files were improperly withheld has not, as a production, been resolved. This episode presents what is publicly known. It does not present what is rumored, speculated, or leaked without attribution. What we do not know, we say we do not know. This episode is a snapshot. The events it describes are still developing. By the time you watch this, some of what we have said may be outdated, and that is expected. Depositions may have produced new revelations. The DOJ may have released additional files. Congressional hearings may have been scheduled. Criminal referrals may have been made. International proceedings, Mandelson's case in the United Kingdom, Lang's investigation in France, may have advanced. What this means for you: check dates on everything. Seek primary sources, the statute, the DOJ press releases, the congressional committee websites, the court filings, not summaries, not even our summary. This episode was produced on 3-date. It reflects what was publicly known at that time. It is not the final word. It is a snapshot of a system in motion. Error log. The 58% figure is an estimate. The denominator comes from the Deputy Attorney General saying more than 6 million, not a precise count. Our calculation uses this imprecise figure because it is the most authoritative available. Deposition content in this episode comes from reporting, post-deposition statements, press coverage, not from transcripts. If transcripts become available, they supersede everything we have said about deposition content. 29 congressional letters sent, 0 responses received as of production. The 43 victim names exposed. That is a Wall Street Journal finding. We have not independently verified that count. We cite the Wall Street Journal. We do not claim to have confirmed it ourselves. Wexner appearing 1,000 plus times. That is from congressional reporting, and our own database confirms it. The project's entity table shows 14,308 person-type mentions for Wexner variants. 1,000 plus is a conservative figure. Clinton's 16 plus flight log entries. That is supported by our corpus. Script 16F extracted 4,286 flights from the unredacted flight logs using a vision language model, and Clinton appears in those records. The global fallout section. Mandelson, Brenda, Lang, Jewel, Axel, all marked current events. Legal proceedings are ongoing. Outcomes may have changed by the time you see this. Every error we find, we disclose. Every correction we make, we document. If you find an error in our data, methodology, or claims, contact us. We correct publicly. What you can do. First, contact your congressional representatives, not about Epstein in general, about the law. Ask specifically, has the DOJ fully complied with Public Law 119-38? The statute requires release of all unclassified records. 58% is not all. You do not need to be an expert. You do not need to have read the files. You need to ask one question. Has the law been followed? Second, follow the depositions. When transcripts from the Wexner and Clinton depositions are released, read them. Not summaries, not commentary, not social media takes. Read the primary source. Form your own conclusions. Third, track the congressional oversight timeline. The House Oversight Committee is conducting active proceedings. Hearings are public. They are streamed. They are a direct mechanism of accountability that you can observe in real time. Fourth, support the transparency mandate. This law passed 427 to 1. That bipartisan consensus should translate into bipartisan enforcement. If the DOJ does not comply with a law that virtually the entire Congress voted for, the question is not about partisanship. It is about the rule of law. 427 to 1, a near-unanimous law, a 58% release, 6 redacted men, 43 exposed victims. The law exists. Enforcement depends on attention. Your attention. Next episode. Paper Trail Episode 12. The Method, Trusting the Machine. This episode asked a legal question. Did the DOJ comply with the law? The next episode asks a technical question. Can the pipeline that analyzed 2 million documents be trusted? Daubert admissibility, the legal standard for whether expert evidence is reliable enough for court. Error rates, where the pipeline fails and how we measure failure. Calibration anchors, the 50 verified dates we use to check whether our temporal analysis is accurate. The difference between code that runs and intelligence you can trust. Validation frameworks. Chow one-species richness estimation. PELT temporal change point detection. Splink entity resolution. Leiden Community Detection. The law created the corpus. Congressional oversight tests whether the law was followed. The next episode asks, can the machine that analyzed the corpus be trusted?